guys, it's Erin, and today I'm going to be sharing my August wrap-up. So this is all of the books that I read in August, most of them with some caveats, which will come in a minute. The other thing I'm going to do a little bit differently this time is I'm not going to go chronologically with the books that I read. I'm going to group them by genre or category. I think that'll just make it easier for me to talk about them, because some of these books I'd like to spend a minute talking about and some of them I don't really want to. So August as a reading month, let's discuss. The first 2.5 weeks of August I had free and clear. I had just moved, but I wasn't really doing anything, so I read a lot. It kind of fell off in the second 2 weeks, especially the very end of August as school started and work picked up and everything. That's just how things are going. My reading so far in September is much lower than it was because I'm spending all of my time reading articles for school and stuff. So it's not that I'm reading less, I'm just reading differently. The first week of August was Booktubeathon. I read 6 books from August 1st to the 5th or whatever. I'm not going to talk about those. If you want to find out what they are, my Goodreads is linked down below. You could go just check my read books, or you can watch the last Booktubeathon vlog. There's a wrap up at the end. Hey, me from the future. So I was editing my video and then I realized I didn't actually even talk about 2 of the books that I read. So that's where my brain is right now. Every time people ask me, hey, how's school going? I'm like, oh, school's going great, because school is going great. But literally it sucks up all of my brain power and then I just can't do anything else, including talk about the books I read, apparently. So here we are. I also read 2 fantasy books in August that I would like to take a second to talk about. The reason I forgot them is because they were both library books and they went back to the library, so I don't have physical copies. So I just grabbed my TBR or my red stack, but they weren't in it, so that's my bad. The first one that I finished was Before She Ignites by Jodi Meadows. This one was interesting, but I did kind of forget that I read it. Not only in the stack, but when I was going through my Goodreads list to make the TBR list, which I did a couple of days before I filmed the original video, hence the forgetting. I forgot about it because that's kind of how I felt about it. The story is about a girl named Mira, and Mira's father is a politician who helped develop this treaty between the 7 different islands, and it was really important, and they named the treaty after Mira, and she became kind of the face of the treaty and grew up as this kind of figurehead representation of this new way of life amongst the archipelago. But when she's a teenager, Mira discovers something that the government didn't really want her to know about, or anybody, and so they throw her in prison to teach her a lesson, and the story kind of goes from there. I don't have anything negative to say about the book, I just didn't super deeply connect with it. The other story I finished, I actually really liked, and so I'm mad that I forgot about it. So the book that I finished was The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This is the first book in the Scion series. I don't remember what the series is called. It's supposed to be a 7-book series. There are 3 books out right now. This is a really interesting, also kind of science fiction / dystopian story. It takes place in kind of an alternate universe England, and in this alternate universe they're 150 years, what is it, yeah, 150 years, 100 years before, 150 of people who are clairvoyant, who had always existed, suddenly found themselves marginalized really severely, and this new dystopian society was put in place in England, and it's the Scion. And Paige is a clairvoyant. She lives with kind of on the fringes of society with a group of other people who live on the fringes of society as clairvoyants. Technically illegal, so I have to keep on the kind of down low, sort of black market-y kind of stuff. I'm explaining this badly. Anyway, Paige is attacked on a subway car, does some stuff she didn't know she could do, and then has to like flee the Scion who come after her, except she doesn't flee the Scion. She gets taken to Oxford, which is the lost city, and there it turns out is where a lot of the clairvoyants who aren't killed get sent. But because there are aliens who are using them to fight other aliens, and it's really good. Like, that description does not even do justice to the, like, coolness of what is going on, and I don't even feel like I can say anything else. That's like the first 50 pages of the story. You figure all of that out, and then it goes from there, and Paige learns to navigate this kind of like new world. The characterization was amazing. I cannot believe this was a debut novel. I would be very surprised if Shannon hadn't written like 12 novels that didn't get published, because it's fantastic. I gave it 4 stars. I just, like, I didn't love it, but it might actually increase in my estimation. I don't know what my hair is doing. It's being itself, which is, yeah. So, highly recommend that one. Shannon's writing is great. The story was really interesting. The characterization was good. The romance was very nice. Really well developed world. So interesting. And, yeah, just good book. So, good chat. Back to Past Erin. Let's start with my first category. So, at some point I heard about this book, and I knew immediately that I had to read it, and I requested it from the library. It's The Only Thing Worse Than Me Is You by Lily Anderson. This was her debut novel, and it's a contemporary, like, high school retelling of Much Ado About Nothing. And this is a Shakespeare play that I'm really interested in. I wrote my master's thesis on Much Ado About Nothing. I'm very, very familiar with the play, and I love it very much. And so I was super excited to see how Anderson adapted the story and kind of brought it into the 21st century. On top of it just being like a high school adaptation, it's like a nerd adaptation. So the main characters are all like juniors and seniors. I think they're seniors. They're all seniors at Mestina High, which is a private school for very, very smart kids. And Trixie is one of the high school seniors this year, and she and her friend Harper have lots of fun plans for senior year, and one of Trixie's major plans is beating Ben West in the rankings. She knows she's not going to be like 1 or 2 in the class, but she'd like to be 3rd because currently Ben is 3rd and she's 4th. She and Ben have grown up together, and they've had this like nerd rivalry for a long time, and of course it's a like hate to love trope, which I just like very much. But I really, really enjoyed this story. I liked Trixie and Ben are both huge nerds. They and their respective friend groups hang out at the local comic book store. Lots of pop culture references, but like nerdy pop culture, so Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Marvel films and all of that. It's really fun. I just kind of like liked that kind of engagement with nerd culture. I thought it was really fun. And I think the adaptation was really, really well done. I, knowing the story so well of Much Ado About Nothing, could kind of follow the major events, but there was a nice twist at the end that I wasn't really expecting, and I think that it made the story better. Also, if you know Much Ado About Nothing, you know at the end, like in Act 4, the kind of major turning point for all of the characters is this really big blow up when Trixie, or Beatrice's friend slash cousin, gets accused of something she didn't do. And in the original play, it's sleeping with a guy before she gets married, and she didn't do it, she's innocent, but a lot of adaptations stick with that same thing, and it is really hard to avoid any slut shaming in the reactions that follow if you want to stay true to the kind of level of reaction that a lot of the people, especially the men around her, have to this event. So Anderson just like completely changed it, and I think it works really well and like makes sense for the high school setting. So I thought that was really great. That kind of set me on a spiral, as you can tell because I just talked about it forever, of reading a bunch of contemporary YA stuff. So I reread Emma Mills' 3 books. Actually, this is the first time I've read First and Then, which is her first book. I got Foolish Hearts in an owl crate at the end of last year and really, really enjoyed it. This is about Claudia, and before her senior year starts, she overhears her school's it couple break up, and one of the members of the couple, Iris, is kind of not very nice, but she and Claudia end up getting stuck together on an English project and then end up trying out for a performance of Much Ado About Nothing and kind of end up being friends. What I like about this book and what I like about all of Emma Mills' books is that her contemporaries have elements of romance in them, and that the main character usually falls in love with somebody, but it is a very minor part of the story, and it's really more just about the main character growing up, making friends, dealing with family problems, and I think that I really, really liked Foolish Hearts and all of them for that. This Adventure Ends is another one that I really enjoyed, about a girl named Sloane who moves to Florida from New York her senior year, and just kind of her falling in love with a group of friends. There's also some stuff that leads to some discussions about art and writing. Sloane's dad is a kind of well-known kind of almost like Nicholas Sparksy sort of writer, but he's got a really awful case of writer's block, and so she and her dad have these interesting conversations about what is writing, what is storytelling, what's the purpose of it, and things like that. And then the other one that I read was First and Then, and this is her debut novel. I do think it's probably the least well executed, but it's still really good. But that makes sense because it's her debut, so you want her to get better. This has a little bit of a Pride and Prejudice kind of thing. The main character, her name is Devon. She's super obsessed with Jane Austen and all of Austen's works, and kind of uses Austen as sort of a guide to life. Devon is also in her senior year, and the thing that's different for her is that her cousin has come to live with them, and she doesn't really like that very much. She sort of thinks he's really annoying. He's a high school freshman, but she ends up in a gym class with him, and also with Ezra Miller, who's their high school football star, and the really nice relationship develops between Ezra and Foster, and between Devon and Foster, and then of course Ezra and Devon. So again, it's just kind of about growing up and learning about yourself and learning about other people. In this book, I think my favorite thing is definitely the relationship between Devon and Foster. That mattered a lot more to the story than Devon and Ezra, and I really liked the kind of character arc that Devon goes through with her reaction to her cousin, and just kind of understanding what he's been through and why he actually is there. Is a really I really enjoyed that part of the story, and I would reread it again just to kind of see that. I didn't care about the romance as much. It didn't feel forced or anything, but it just felt like it had to happen, and so you were just kind of waiting for it to happen, but I wasn't sitting there rooting for them necessarily. So yeah, because I liked The Only Thing Worse Than Me Is You so much, I decided to get Lily Anderson's other 2 books from the library. So I finished the most recent one, Undead Girl Gang, as of filming this, but I finished it in September, so wait a couple weeks for my thoughts about that one. I also read Not Now, Not Ever, which was her second book. This book is set in the same world as The Only Thing Worse Than Me Is You, several years later. So the main male character in here was a kind of freshman sidekick of the gang of friends in the first book, and now he is going into his senior year of high school. It's kind of a common theme, senior year of high school, time for change and growing up, I guess. I don't know. Whatever. This is about Elliot. She is the daughter of a Air Force person. Her mom and a lawyer. Her dad and her parents have different expectations for her, and it's kind of like a competition, and she doesn't really like either of the options. She doesn't really want to go straight into the Air Force, and she doesn't really want to become a lawyer or a business person or something like that. So she takes things into her own hands, and she runs away to a summer camp for the intellectually gifted, and this summer camp has a like academic competition aspect to it, and there are 4 winners of the competition, and those 4 winners get a full ride to this fancy private college in that would allow her to study science fiction, which is what she really wants to do. The only problem is that her cousin Isaiah also goes to the same camp and is also run away and not told his parents. Elliot reinvents herself as Ever Lawrence, and this book is pretty heavily inspired by Oscar Wilde's play The Importance of Being Earnest. I feel like the adaptation didn't work quite as well, partially I think because Elliot was self-consciously using the play to kind of bring meaning to her experience, and it was the influence for her experience, reinventing herself with her new name and stuff, so it felt too self-conscious to me. I also felt like there were some other flaws here. It had some similar elements to The Only Thing Worse Than Me Is You, in that there was a little bit of a mystery going on that the smart kids had to band together and fix. I liked the kind of inclusion of the nerdy smart kids. Some of the characters from the first book come back as camp counselors in the second book, and the interactions that we see between them and with them and the younger high schoolers are really interesting, but ultimately I feel like it just kind of crumbled a little bit in the third act. The mystery sort of like it got solved, but it didn't really seem to have very much to do with anything. I also feel like I understand Ever's character arc, but I don't think it was as well executed as Anderson's second and third books. So it was a little disappointing to me, I guess, ultimately, but it was still entertaining. I did kind of start to wear off contemporary YA at this point, so that might have also influenced my opinion. My thing with contemporary YA is that I tend to like, either I'll read like one novel in a blue moon and really enjoy it, or I'll do like a little binge, and usually by the time I'm done with the binge, I'm like over it. It's just like, you know, when you're closer to 30 than 20, your life is different, and the angst of being in high school is fun to kind of revisit and think about, especially if the story is really well told, but ultimately it gets a little bit repetitive and a little bit just kind of boring after a while. So anyway, the last book I finished was Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia, and this was also a reread for me. This is about a girl named Eliza who struggles with anxiety and depression in real life and doesn't really have any friends in person, but has a really rich online life because she's the creator of this really, really popular webcomic called Sea of Monsters. She has a couple of friends online who know her real identity, but nobody else does. Her parents don't really get her. Her brothers are annoying and super into sports, and she just like doesn't feel like her kind of her real life matters. But then one day, a boy transfers to her school in kind of the middle of the semester, and she learns that he's a really big fan of her comic and is actually one of the like big fans that like in the community are a big deal. And they kind of start to form this friendship, but she can't tell him who she is, and she like the longer it goes, the harder it is for her to kind of like drop this bombshell that like, oh, by the way, the thing that you adore, I made. And then some things happen that really kind of push her, and overall I think it's a really good story. The first time I read this, I had it on my Kindle, and I think I read it like in one sitting, and I was up really late. I found it really moving. I think the portrayal of Eliza's feelings of anxiety and so on are very well done. They're very accurate. This time I was interested, maybe because I kind of knew what happened, I paid a little bit more attention to Eliza as a character, and I realized, and I think I've heard this complaint mentioned by people before about the book, especially at the beginning, Eliza's not actually very likable. She comes across as super grumpy And I think I read it with just like an older perspective looking at Eliza, and it was like, okay, honey, your parents don't actually hate you, which is something she learns. She does learn. But I think some of her character arc is about, yes, these like human interaction things are hard for you, but you're not trying to help the people who care about you interact with you. She just kind of like shuts her parents off, she shuts her brothers off, and some of the things that she learns are like her brothers are actually kind of cool people and they care about her, and she sees that her parents really do care about her, and that some of the reason that they don't understand her life and they don't understand what she's doing is because she just hasn't told them. So if you start the book and you find Eliza a little bit off-putting, hang in there, because that's kind of like part of her journey as a character. I still liked it. I think I liked it maybe a little bit less. I had a less of an emotional reaction to the story this time and more of an intellectual one. So that was my contemporary binge. Like I said, I'm kind of done with contemporary now. I don't really, yeah. I also read 3 classics, 4 classics-a-thon technically. So the first one I finished was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and oh my gosh, you guys, this story is amazing. If you like classics at all, go read this one. It's better than Jane Eyre. It's better than most of the classics that I've read, to be honest. It was fantastic. Definitely like very high on my list of favorite books ever. This is about a woman named Helen Graham. It's framed a little bit, a mysterious woman shows up in this small community as a tenant of Wildfell Hall, and everybody's like very curious about her and they want to know who she really is. But over time there's some like backbiting and some girls being mean, and some rumors start about her, and the narrator of the frame, a guy named Gilbert Markham, has fallen in love with Helen, and he, even though she's like no, she's kind of been rejecting him, he's being a jerk, but he goes and kind of confronts her about the rumors, and she shares her journal with him, and the journal recounts this relationship that she's had with this man who became her husband, like over the course of 5 or 6 years. So it starts when she is thinking about getting married, and then traces kind of their courtship, their marriage, and then the realization that he's not the man that she really thought he was or hoped he was. She was one of those girls who was like, oh, I know he has flaws, but I can change him. And she learns that she can't actually change him. He becomes an alcoholic, he becomes emotionally abusive, she is kind of like forced to associate with his friends who are like all just like having affairs with each other. One of the guys keeps pushing her to have an affair with him, and she's like, no, I don't actually. And it's just really fascinating to follow her character journey as she kind of comes to understand what she's signed herself up for, and then come to terms with it, and to understand how it is that she like what she should do, how she should react to this. She's kind of like, he cuts her off from her family and friends, so she doesn't really have a lot of help. I just really admire Helen. I admire her strength, and I admire her decision to do the moral thing even when it's hard, in the middle of a lot of kind of really like starry-eyed, you know, stories about romance and marrying the rich guy and getting everything you ever wanted. It's like interesting to see something when that doesn't happen. So anyway, fabulous book. I think I stayed up till like 3 in the morning finishing this, and I don't know if I've ever done that with a classic that I didn't like have to finish for school. So A+. The next it's a contemporary classic, I guess, that I finished was actually for school, and it's Don DeLillo's The Names. This book is kind of hard to explain. It's about a guy named James. He is an insurance adjuster for a company, and they're like Middle East rep. So he is based in Athens, and he like travels to do stuff. The reason I'm vague about it is because the book is vague about what he's actually doing. He is separated from his wife, and she is working on a dig on one of the Greek islands and their son is with her. The story is about James and his relationship with his wife at post-separation. It's also about James and his friends who are all international kind of expats. They're business people, they work for banks and the government and stuff. It thinks a lot about, it's a very like cerebral, like theme-driven novel about stuff. It's really interesting, like I really enjoyed it. I think I rated it 4 stars. I found that the things it was talking about and like concerned with were really relevant to today, even though the book was written in the early 80s, talking a lot about problems in the Middle East and even foreseeing problems in the Middle East. It was really interesting to hear about people saying, like, to have the characters say, oh, this is probably going to happen, or just wait, this thing will turn up. And then it did actually happen in real life, like after the book was written. So that was a little frightening, a little weird. I don't know. It also thought a lot about language and meaning and some esoteric stuff. There's a cult that's like obsessed with the alphabet as like the holder of meaning, except there's not really any meaning. It's just everything's letters, and it's weird, like I said, and hard to explain, but if any of that sounds interesting to you, I recommend that you check it out. And then the last book I finished on this list, I don't actually know what the last book I finished in August was, but one of the last books I finished was Oliver Twist, and this is by Charles Dickens. It's his first real novel. He wrote 2 other books before this, but they were more like collections of loosely related short stories, whereas this is like really actually a single narrative. It's about a kid named Oliver Twist. It starts when he's born in a workhouse. His mother dies. He's an orphan. Nobody knows his identity. He's raised at the kind of like local orphanage and then transferred back to the workhouse when he reaches a certain age. Then he's farmed out as an apprentice to an undertaker, and things happen, and then he ends up in London with a gang of thieves. And that all happens actually really quickly. Like, those are the things that you think about when you think about Oliver Twist, right? The stuff that's reached the like cultural conception when you think about Oliver Twist is the like, please sir, can I have some more in the workhouse? And maybe the Undertaker, and then definitely Fagin and the Artful Dodger and the like whole gang thing. But the story's not really about Oliver. Like, I expected most of the story to be about Oliver's time in the gang, but it's not actually. A lot of the story is really more focused on the question of who is Oliver actually, through a variety of very interesting and sometimes coincidental circumstances. Oliver comes to know 2 sets of wealthier people who kind of adopt Oliver and take his interests to heart and kind of try to pull him out of the life of crime that he keeps getting sucked back into, not through any desire of his own. He's almost a little too perfect, to be honest. But the mystery aspect of it, like figuring out who Oliver is, and we learn too that Fagin, the gang leader, wants Oliver for more than just because Oliver would make a good pickpocket. Like, there's an ulterior thing going on, which is very interesting. This is Dickens' first novel. It's a little coincidental sometimes. You just kind of have to roll with it. And like, would this really happen in real? If you keep asking that, you're gonna get annoyed. So just don't. And the ending is a little bit sensational, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. It's a nice Dickens because it's pretty short for Dickens and it reads pretty quickly. So if you want to kind of like dip your toe into the Dickens water without, picking up Our Mutual Friend or Bleak House or something, try this one. So those were all the books that I read in August, minus Booktubeathon. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you think about them. How was your reading month in August? Was it great? Was it okay? I'd love to know. But that's it for this video. I will see you in my next one. Bye.